negative comments are more powerful than positive ones.
Talk about the shit that everyone's doing wrong.
Meetings aren't nothing, but they aren't everything.
You're not doing sales anymore. You're mastering nurturing.
Dude, 100%.
Well, hey, dude. What I think would be great to chat about today is you're probably talking with like VPs of sales or companies that don't have a VPs of sales, like what's going on with the current market, how people are doing outbound, right? Like so what are people totally screwing up? I love your LinkedIn content, dude.
I'm inconsistent these days, but
yeah, we need to get you more consistent, man. But
the hard part, man, is just like I'm building like a legitimate business, so it's like
it's hard.
Content's gravy for me because like we're good at outbound, and the content's always gravy. And like I scheduled a post for like 11:30 today, but I'm inconsistent, because I'm like actually trying to build something. Like which is an excuse, but it's tough.
Yeah, well, I can give you my system, man, that I do to be consistent. Like I still write all the content. So I still write all the content. I have to write mine,
dude. No one
can write. I'm
too abrasive.
Yeah, well, that's what I love, man, because my dad growing up, my mom's a fiery Latina from Mexico, and my dad was a prison. Right, so I kind of like know the abrasiveness. Like that's the way I grew up in that environment. So like, I'm like, oh, this guy does not fuck around. He just says what he thinks. And like, personally, I don't have the guts to like be that serious on LinkedIn. So I give you kudos for having
we could talk. Actually, we could probably save that conversation for the podcast. Like, we could talk about that. That'd be fun content on why it is I am that way. Because I have like a legitimate philosophy
let's get into
behind
it, man. Yeah, let's get into it. Yeah, I want to hear like what like what's the mindset? Yeah, tell me, man.
So for me, it's there's a really good book called Power versus Force, and it's a really good read. Right, I have a faith background, which some people would be shocked by, considering how abrasive I can be online sometimes. But I do have a faith background, believe it or not. So reading books like Power versus Force is really challenging from a philosophical perspective, but there's really good stuff in there. And so there's this whole element of frequency, right? Like everything puts off frequency, right? The table in front of me puts off a frequency, right? Low, but it does put off one. But different emotions, traits, feelings, characteristics also put off different frequencies. And so some are positive, some are negative, some are more, some are less. But love is the second highest frequency, right? What's funny is low frequency stuff is usually the negative things we associate with. So depression, anxiety, anger, all those kind of things are not in the same realm, right? So love is number two, but number one is like substantially more than number two, and it's shocking. It is it's this trait of authenticity. So whenever someone is in a state of extreme authenticity, they put off this incredible frequency, which tends to attract people. It also repels people, right? It's a high frequency that can kind of do both, right? I do think that there's an element of I do live a very authentic life. I think part of that is I was pretty insecure as a kid, and there's something, I don't know exactly what happened in my life around the end of high school into college, where I really like grew into this, like, I'm just unapologetically me. But I still struggle with it a little bit. And there was this guy who I really looked up to. I was friends with him, but he's more of a mentor than anything.
Yeah.
And we got in a little tiff over something, and in my head I just blew it up proportionally. Like, dude, this guy, I love this guy, but he's probably thinking all these crazy things about me, and like, I just don't want to be that way. Like, she's my dude. And so I called him one day about 4 months after not talking to him, right? Because it was just a pretty bad, little blow up for both of us. But I was like, listen, G, like, man, I'm so sorry. Like, I stepped out of line. Like, I love you, man. I just don't want you to think bad about me. Joey, man, I love you too. He goes, but as much as I love you, I don't think about you.
Oh.
And to me, like at first, I was like, oh, dude, like for real? I think about you all the time.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it all day. Yeah.
And he goes, man, he goes, the thing is like, I'm a 45-year-old man. I've got a wife, 2 kids. I'm running this big organization in San Diego. Like, you're important in your sphere, but like, and you're important when you're in front of me, but like, you're not important outside of that. to me enough compared to my other priorities in my life.
Yeah.
And so it really hit me of like, people don't think about you or care about you nearly as much as you think they do, except for the immediate people around you. And so what that did is it unlocked something in me that really freed me up to just be like, dude, just be you. Like, no one cares at the end of the day. And if they do care, awesome. But like, that's cherry on top. And so I think that is just, it's taken me into the, the minor success I've had in my career. I think also it helps. I've made my money, in the terms of like, my bills are covered for hopefully forever, but I can be canceled or whatever you want to call it. And it won't, I will sleep the same that night as I do any other night. So I think that's probably where it comes from. And I think that my content is just the way that I communicate can come across abrasive, but I think that it also comes to the tension. And I do genuinely care about people, and I care about making changes, and I care about shifting people's perspective, because I do think that people are enslaved in their mind. And sometimes you got to jar them awake a little bit to get them to actually see the value behind the message. Because there's so many people that put out really great content on LinkedIn, but nobody pays attention. And therefore, their value is not being seen or distributed. Whereas I think that, I can be a little bit more abrasive and people pay attention and it gets clicks and views, and my value can sometimes be distributed more. So
yeah. No, I think, in a way, like that is the way to, like, let's call it grow quickly, right? Or like get attention quickly. Cause you started getting attention pretty quickly, I believe, just from on your stuff. Right. And I think it is taking that like almost abrasive, or I look at it as like contrarian, right? Like I just see like, okay, it's like contrarian. Hey, you think this, it's actually this, but it is in your authentic voice, which I think is awesome, because I can like read that voice and be like, oh yeah, he's being real. Like this guy's not like, he's not trying to, skew anyone in the wrong way or whatever. And honestly, you don't even have to be like, what's great about that is you don't even have to be some crazy, you don't have to do any hacks per se. You don't have to be a crazy good writer. You don't have to do this. It's just a change in the mindset that you're doing. And I'm like,
and there is, unfortunately, when the market gives you feedback, like you do develop a little bit like, all right, well, if I do it, if my hook is this way, the way I like to explain it is like, I'd like to throw rocks at beehives, like the hornet's nest. Because what it does is it takes all the negative comments are more powerful than positive ones in a lot of ways, because when they comment, I can kind of like jar back with them a little bit. We can kind of spar in the comment section. Well, as you know, like the more engagement is going on in your post, the more people want to see it. And so it brings the other hornets from the other nest, like, hey, dude, you screwed with my other hornet's nest. You screwed my buddies over there. So they jump in. And the good thing is like, it does drive inbound. And so the people I want to talk to see through all of it, and they look at the message and they're like, oh, that's helpful or sharp or whatever. And they always come in the DMs. It's the people who don't like, comment, or share that are typically your best customers. They're the ones who are kind of just watching.
Yeah, the money's in. So there's like the money's in the lurkers, man. Like I'll tell you, just being in that LinkedIn game for a while, building LinkedIn products, Like
the money's in the following, don't you?
Yeah, you're pretty good in like the dude, the freaking the money's in the lurkers, man. And
it is.
So we have this like community of like 4,000 plus like LinkedIn creators, right? And that's like I have a whole lesson on that, right? Because everyone's like, oh my gosh, like people aren't liking, commenting, and da 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 da. And I go, how many people viewed your last post? They're like 800. I'm like, dude, if I told you that you could walk into a room right now and talk to 800 people and deliver your message, whatever message that is that you want, it doesn't have to be that good, and 800 people will see it. Would you take that
pumped.
If you're running a bit? You go fucking crazy, right? You'd be like, dude, you would be pumped. And so it's this like comparison trait of like, oh, but like this person's getting X amount.
And you do it every day. If you do it every day and you get 800 people, like it's not going to always be the same 800 people.
Yeah, it's crazy. And so I think that shift in perspective is different, right? And the other thing I want to bring up here is one of my, you kind of reminded me of one of my favorite quotes, and people are going to make fun of me because I say this quote all the time, but it's like about this authenticity, which is, and I forget who said it, but it's love me or hate me. There's no money in the middle. Right?
That's good. Yeah.
And it's amazing, man. I just like, so every time I'm like, oh, should I post this? I'm going to be scared, whatever. I'm like, I just think about that quote. And I'm like,
the loneliest place for your content to live is in obscurity.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's
if you're obscure, it just doesn't get seen. Whether it's good or it's bad, it doesn't matter.
And people really hate indifference, dude. Like they hate when you're indifferent, right? Like I think that no, just say what you don't say. I think, just say the thing. You know,
people are extremely attracted to someone who has a spine or conviction about them. You know, I think conviction is authenticity, right? Like, you know, this is one thing I have to train a lot of my team on, especially those who engage, who are more on the account side, and they, you know, we've got decent clients and they want to kind of bend to the client's will at time. I'm like, listen, man, like at the end of the day, like you have to be willing to kind of challenge their way of thinking, and that's going to require you to have conviction, because the opposite of that, of not having conviction, is typically people pleasing. And you tend to look at people pleasing as a good thing, right? Like, oh, I just want people to be happy. It's like, yeah, but happy doesn't make them money, right? Like, and so having conviction about you is authentic, and therefore, if you're a people pleaser, then naturally you're in a state of inauthenticity at all times, which is just not where it's not a place where you're going to stand very strong. So,
yeah,
you know?
Yeah, the conviction part is like, it's, you know, I would say one of the greatest traits in sales. I had a sales leader I worked with, and I asked him the question. I was like, hey man, like, what do you think is truly like a great trait of a salesperson, right? And this guy's been around the block. He's worked at multiple he's in his 50s, right? He's been successful, seen it all. One of the best sales leaders I know. And he goes, conviction, man. It's like believing. And that is why when any salesperson asks me like, oh, where should I go next? Or like companies I should go work at or whatever, I tell them, do you have conviction in the product? Because if you don't have conviction in the product, that's going to seed into everything else you do as a salesperson. So you need to believe it works yourself, right?
100%. The best, 100% agree with that.
Yeah.
I would, my stack ranking would be conviction, intuition, and discernment are the top 3 traits of the best salespeople.
And then intuition, how does someone, do you think that's natural, or do you think that's like built over time?
I do think that there is, you know, there's a lot of winning the lottery with DNA, and, you know, like I am fortunate I grew up poor first half of my life, and then we kind of moved into like the middle class, and then my dad's continued his career since then and become very successful, and he's the number 1 private sales, national sales director at Home Depot. And so still to this day, for 15 years running, has been that number 1 position, drives $500 million of revenue a year just in sales. And so I do think that it is learned, but I do think there is an aspect of, there is a lottery draw for some, but that is not an excuse for you to not develop intuition. Intuition comes with repetition and experience. And so when you drive a car, like you intuitively know how to drive the car, at least most people, hopefully at this point, you know how to drive a car. So intuitively you can drive home and not think about it and drive fairly well. You know, the potholes, you know, you kind of know where cops spend their time, so maybe slow down a little bit. Like intuitively, you just have an idea of the route. And so in sales, you know, the way I like to explain it is, I'm a rock star process over rock star salespeople. It's kind of our motto. And so I'm a big believer in process, but I don't believe process needs to be this complete sequential, do this, then this, then this, then this, and this. I think there's an element of that. But the way I look at process oftentimes, especially in a sales process, is it's more like guardrails on a highway, right? Guardrails don't look that important, but they keep you on the highway. And they keep you in the direction you need to go. That's meant to be process. And it's different than saying like, no, process is a lane, right? Or it's like, hey, you gotta be in this lane, you gotta go this speed. That's more that sequential, do this, then this, then this. But intuition and discernment is, so with process as your guiding light is, okay, the guardrails keep you going, or you can say the external lines or the little bumps right outside the highway. They keep you on it, they keep you going where you need to go. But as a good salesperson, you need to know which lane to pick, when to speed up, when to slow down, when to kind of move over, and so on. And so I think that's where like that top tier salesperson lives, is they know like, all right, generally I need to be here, but I can kind of pick where I need to go based on where the prospect's at or whatever.
Yeah. That's a freaking amazing point. It's like process with a level of autonomy almost, right? Like, but like, as you mentioned, different lanes of the autonomy. There's still, hey, everyone's going south. You're still going south, but there's a little bit of that autonomy, which I also think is where people really their output is the best, right? And right is when they have some level of autonomy. I just think in life people do best when they have some level of autonomy. No one likes to just be like, you need to do this, whether it's relationships or work, right? Like,
autonomy allows you to make the mistakes you need to make, right? Because I'm a big fan of like, dude, go make the mistakes. Like, there's more learning in the mistakes than there are in the successes. Oftentimes, it's like in when I'm working on a company who has a lower win rate, right? I oftentimes don't say, okay, well, what can we tactically do to increase that win rate? I say, no, let's first look at, if you're at a 15% win rate, let's look at the 85 loss rate. Like, why'd you lose? Right? Because your losses are where the learnings are. There's a far more gain in paying attention to the 85% than there is in paying attention to what you did right in the 15%. You do both, right? But it's like there's a lot of meat on the bone in that 85% of losing that you can learn from. And I think that autonomy allows you to find those potholes in the road, that finds the checkpoints where the cops are kind of sitting with their laser and all that kind of stuff. And so I think you have to have that, and you got to learn. Obviously, any good sales organization is going to have a pretty rock solid process, but use discernment in the in between.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And what do you so those are the qualities of a good salesperson. And like for you, what you've done is you've kind of changed the one thing I saw that you posted once that I'm still trying to like wrap my head around is the way you're actually thinking about compensating some of these like SDR specifically. I think you were saying, whereas most of the time they get paid on like if they get a meeting booked or whatever, and you had different ways of looking at that. And I want to talk to you about this because it's so funny. I come from Outreach, right? Where I was one of the first employees at Outreach, right? So building the first version of it, on the engineering product side. And then like I spent like 7 years, this whole predictable revenue model, right? And so I see your stuff and I'm like, shit, he's right though. Like things change, right? Like it's like that, what got you here won't get you there anymore.
Right. Yeah.
And so like, I just kind of want to hear, let's talk about the shit that everyone's doing wrong and how you're basically changing or flipping that on its head to actually align with where the market is today or with how teams should be functioning.
Yeah, it kind of boils down to this one statement that is, meetings aren't nothing, but they aren't everything. Talking specifically about SDRs, but it has a massive downstream revenue impact as well. And so, right, meetings aren't nothing. So we're not saying that meetings don't matter, right? It's kind of ironic because the company we bought, which is Phone Ready Leads, which for those who know Ryan Reisert, he's always said like meetings don't matter. It's like, no. Pump the brakes, guy. Like, meetings do matter, but they don't matter as much as we think they do. To your point, like I think that we hire and fire, we set quota around, we bonus around this meetings portion of the market, right? And there's a certain type of person that takes a meeting from a stranger. There's also a certain type of company in a certain point in their buyer's journey where they will take a meeting, but they'll take a meeting with everybody. But that's usually 3 to 10% of the market tops. And so if we are just incentivizing and creating plan and quota around that small percentage of the market, then we're not capturing the rest of the market, right? There's 30% that'll never buy, right? The whole Chet Holmes thing. But there's 30% that's not now, and there's 30% that's not thinking about it. They're unaware. They're either problem unaware, solution unaware, or product unaware. And so it is. I believe it is now the job of the SDR to not necessarily push the meeting, but it's to identify and segment out the market, right? So outbound success is the fundamentals at scale consistently over time, right? That's the 4 levels to it. You've got to do the fundamentals. You've got to create a system to where you can do the fundamentals at scale. If growth is a metric for you that you care about, you've got to do it consistently, right? Repeatedly, day in, day out, the same way over and over again. Obviously paying attention to where you can kind of pivot and move. But then you got to commit over time, long time. And so part of the fundamentals, there's really 4 elements to it. There's list, message, rep, professional follow-up. That's it. So list, we have to really hone in on our TAM. Like, who is our TAM? And not just anybody who can buy from us ever, right? There's certainly segments of the market that are better buyers for us, either now or in the future. So getting the list strategy right, not just account identification, but also account coverage and contact mapping. So I don't know if people are familiar with Challenger. The people are usually familiar with Challenger Sale. They're not as familiar with Challenger Customer, which I think is a better book than Challenger Sale.
Yeah.
But Challenger Customer talks about like who are the key influencers in the account, right? There are multiple ways, multiple chinks in the armor, if you will, to find entry points into an account. And so we need to be able to have account coverage of who all those potential people are. And so it is account identification, who are the right accounts. It is also, yes, who's my key buyer, likely C-suite, VP level, whatever it might be. But there's also, I look at it as like 3 tiers. You've got your key buyers, your buying committee, and your frontline members. Your key buyers have their name on the contract or the check, right? They're the ones who tend to, they have to be, raise their hand, thumbs up for the solution to move forward. The buying committee either has to be thumbs up or thumbs neutral to you. They cannot be thumbs down, but they can influence it negatively. They can influence it positively. And they can also stay neutral and the deal can still get done. And then there's frontline members, which they're not going to influence the deal, but they're going to be impacted by your solution. And so that's where you can go and gather intel on the account. Okay. So in my case, we go and we build, outbound departments, it's an elementary level of what we do. But for us, it's important for us to talk to the SDRs, the AEs, the sales development managers, the VP of sales in some cases, because VP of sales have less authority than they've ever had currently. They're not handling a budget anymore in most cases, which is odd to me, considering they are supposed to be leading the sales department. But there's a lot of folks that you can talk to that you can then take that information and intel and you can go upstream with it back to the key buyer, to the buying committee. So all that goes in a list. Then there's messaging, right? So the fundamentals of messaging is you got to have unique positioning. You got to have a compelling ask, and you've got to have repeatable scripting, right? For SDRs, right? You got to have a repeatable way to, again, guardrails, into how we're going to communicate that message to this list. After message, it's rep, right? So it's the statistics, at least according to the Bridge Group, is it takes 3.5 months for a rep to become autonomous from an activity perspective. So that's what we call ramp. It takes 14 months to hit quota attainment. Unfortunately, only 43% of reps are hitting quota. I think it's actually lower
it's even
that.
high. Yeah, I think it's high.
I think it's like 28 according to Salesforce. According to RepView, it's like 43.
Yeah.
And that's, it's only a handful of industries there.
I know one specific company just on that point that like 90% of reps aren't hitting. Like literally, it's like two people out of like.
It's wild. It's going, and it's just plummeting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Part of our pitch deck is we show them like the trajectory of production from a quota attainment perspective.
Yeah.
And so you got to have all that for the rep. And then the last part is professional follow-up. And so this is all of this brings me back to your original question on why meetings aren't everything. So professional follow-up is, I think that we have to exit the predictable revenue model where it's SDR, AE, SDRs do all the front loading. They set the meetings for the AE sits in their ass and they wait for meetings. They complain about the leads, et cetera. They don't hit quota either. To where we have to have self-sourcing AEs, but they're not self-sourcing cold. It's not the best use of their time. What they need to be doing is self-sourcing off of the segments of the market based on where companies are at. And so we call those activated accounts. So whereas you might be able to book 8, 10% of the market, great. You can also activate 30% of the market. And that's where the professional follow-up comes in, where your AEs who are far more product aware, far more market aware, product and market alignment, they can have a more intelligent, deep business acumen driven conversation with that 30% of the market, but it requires them to follow up. And so I think the SDR's job has to shift from we just set meetings and get no's to we have to identify who's willing to take meetings, who's in market now or soon, who's a not now, but eventually, who's not thinking about it that we can create intrigue, interest, intent, or information out of. And then pass that smaller segment of the market to the AEs and say, hey, we've already worked them. We've talked to them. Here's the context of the conversations. AEs, go do professional follow-up over and over and over and over again. That's why I think meetings don't matter, is because you can go capture a lot larger percentage of the market if you create a strategy around the other 90%.
Have you read that book, Sell Like Crazy from Sabri? It's really
Sabri
good.
Subi?
Yeah, Sabri Subi.
Yeah.
And he has that same chart, which I think he got from someone else that I love. That is the same concept you're talking about, which is 3% of your target market anytime is ready to buy, 37%. And I had a post on this, 37% is like not problem aware, not solution aware. And so if you look at that, that means 97% of people at any one time are not ready to buy, right? Like not ready to buy. Yet we target 97% of people like everyone's ready to buy. right?
And that's assuming even the 3% is a weird metric, because it's assuming that 3% want to take a meeting, right? There's still people who are buying, but they don't want to take a meeting. Mm-hmm. And so what's your strategy for those people when you have a conversation? And what's the follow-up look like there, right? And so I think oftentimes we're pushing meetings for people who aren't ready, but could be soon. If we did a different approach than just shoving them on a meeting, they'll disqualify you. They'll jump out. You have a bad taste in their mouth, or they're like, yeah, we already know we're not going to work with them. Whereas I think that if you looked at it more like, yeah, let's set the meetings we can set, that makes sense, but let's also just have very solid conversations to activate accounts, and then let's create the strategy on the back end of those activations based on the context of those conversations. I think the SDR, I think we need to literally just change the title, right? It's no longer a sales development rep. I think it's more of a market development rep. You've got to develop the market, understand where people are at, what are the segments in the market, and then from there, professional sellers, the AEs of the world, who have a lot more product market understanding, are then to follow up with that market segmentation. So that's at least our approach. It seems to work.
Yeah. Well, I've been preaching too. I'm like which is very along the similar lines, which is you're not doing sales anymore. You're mastering nurturing, right? Which is
100%. Yes.
Like, it's not sales. You're, again, 97% not ready to buy, like in if it's 97, actually 95, whatever. But you're mastering nurturing, man. Like keeping people engaged. Like I saw Jason Limpkin had a tweet like a month ago or something, and it put it in perspective. And he was like, look, I'm looking for a specific type of product. There's always 3 or 4 versions of the same kind of product that are pretty much feature parity. One rep follows up with me every couple of weeks with a piece of valuable information. The rest I haven't heard from. Who do you think I'm going to buy from in 3 months when I'm ready? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's like, holy shit. And but we're worried about the now versus like the plant the seed, water the seed, And it's like, how do we do more of the planting in the seed versus the like, hey, I want to get the plant now, versus yeah.
What's interesting is we focus so much on activity volume to get the meeting, right? So we know the statistic, it takes between 8 and 15 touch points to get a meeting. Okay.
Yeah.
But what we don't pay attention to is follow-up post meeting. To that point with Jason's post is the statistic that just came out, and it is alarming. And this is the epitome of why outbound is failing, or it's the reason. 80% of deals require 5 or more follow-ups post meeting, right? Once it's opportunity. So 80% of opportunities require 5 or more follow-ups. 71% of reps are doing 1 or fewer follow-ups.
Crazy.
That's not including the percentage that's doing 2 or 3 or 4, which is still less than 5, which is required or more for 80% of deals. And so mathematically speaking, we can't win at outbound if that is what our organization looks like. And so the follow-up nurture game is by far the lost art, I think, of B2B sales, whether it be inbound or outbound, doesn't matter, which channel it is.
Yeah, I was working. This is crazy, man. I was working with I won't name the organization, but let's call this person John, right? I was working with John at good old John at Acme Corp, right? And we just launched a SaaS product, which is basically to help with follow-ups and marketing and sales.
Dude, y'all's brand is sick, by the way.
Thank you, man. Yeah, it's awesome. It's definitely not enterprise, And some CMO, like higher level, are like, yeah, they're not going to take you seriously. And I'm like, look, I don't really care. Like more people like it than say they don't like it. And like, if I do it the same, I'm just going to look like everyone else, and that's not memorable. So,
have you seen our brand at all?
Yeah, I saw that too. And I was like, okay, we're on the same page.
We call it the FU cheese mascot. Well, we call them the FU cheese, and like in certain contexts, it's the follow-up cheese, But realistically, we have some of the same icons. So like right now on the website, he's doing this, but we have some of our collateral once you're deeper in the process that he's doing this. And so
nice.
It's awesome. Yeah. Especially when we show like market comparisons versus our numbers and benchmarks. We usually have like market comparisons. This is what's, like, all right, 4% connect rate, 11% meeting booked rate, 55% show rate, whatever. And then you show our numbers and you look at like, okay, here's what downstream impact looks like if you don't take just meetings only approach. And then you show like weighted pipeline difference at the end. And he's just at the end just doing this. It's our middle finger to the market.
Has anyone called you out on that? Like, hey, I think there's a mistake here. Like,
no, we have had, like, and we work in mid-market enterprise. We've had a few, call it management level people be like, is he flicking us off? I'm like, no. Let's be clear. He's flicking off the market. This is yes, correct. No. If you work with us, you guys will have a metaphorical middle finger to the marketplace. You don't have to actually have a real middle finger like us.
Yeah.
So people will push back a little. They don't push back. They just kind of like, oh, that's funny. And you're like, okay,
yeah.
well.
Oh, that's so good. Dude. Something similar. Like on our website, it's Mexican Day of the Dead. So we have some like Spanish words incorporated in there, throughout, like basic ones that like a lot of people want to understand. Not everyone, but like vamos, right? Like most people would be, oh, I've heard that, or like que bueno, like cerveza. I'm talking really like a gringo right now. But what I mean by it, I've had literally like 5 people reach out to me like, do you have an English version of your website?
Yeah, one of those like Google Translate at the top where it's like, do you want to read this in English or Spanish?
Yeah. That's hilarious. And I'm like, it is like 99% English, but it's just a couple words. And like, oh yeah, it just like, can you please put it in English? And I'm just like,
it's like a feather test. Like if you don't get this, your intellect is probably not good enough to work with us anyways. So let's
it's
wrap
my
this
litmus
up.
test. Yeah, it's my litmus test, man. Like no response. Like no response. Yeah. So yeah, that's funny, dude. But where were we going before we got on this whole like brand?
We were talking about meetings.
Meetings. The nurturing I was gonna tell you a story. So I was talking with John at Acme Corp, right? And I basically give part of that pitch too right now, right? Where I'm like, look, you're not nurturing any of your people. How do you nurture? Like the best way to do is with content. How are your teams creating content? They're like, well, marketing does it all. And then I go, well, marketing's doing it. How long does it take you to get one asset? 3 weeks. Okay. Well, if it takes you to get 3 weeks to get one thing and you're needing to follow up multiple times with all these opportunities, what are you going to do? And they're like, we don't know. And then I go,
you've lost the deal at that point.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, okay. So then I go, here's how we could help with that, right? And put the solution. But anyways, I go, as a test, go to your Gong real quick. And they pull up their Gong. I go to your closed lost ops. And they pull up their closed lost ops. And then I go, look at how many touches are on all of your closed lost ops. And then they scroll and they scroll and they scroll. And they're like, oh my God, none of these closed lost ops are being followed up with like at all. And I'm like, there's my point, right? Yeah. Like, how do you create a process around that where you're not saying, hey, let's get on a meeting, but templatizing content that like your marketing team starts that you can send them, whether it's case studies on one pagers or whatever it is, and then following up in that way, and then doing soft CTAs where you can like ask for the meeting via the content. So it's not the rep bugging them, right? And so they go, okay, that makes sense. But going back to my point, it's like, I bet you can pull up 99% of people's closed lost ops in their Gong, and they're literally a majority will have 0 touches on them.
I can promise you 71% is going to have 1 or less. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's wild. That's a HubSpot stat too. So widely accepted.
Yeah. Which is crazy, right? It's like,
it is.
It's almost like we need to re-educate people on like how buying goes. Right. And it's hard to, this is a contrarian take, but it's hard to say someone's good at sales when they don't understand how people buy. Right.
100%. Yeah.
So like if I hear someone that's like, oh yeah, well, I'm a great sales leader, and I go, well, most people aren't buying right now. What are you doing for that? And they're like, nothing. And it's like, are you actually great at sales? Because you don't understand who you're selling to and how they do it, right? Yes. It's just, I think it needs to be a re-education where most people in SaaS, I think there was this golden age, right, of like 2010 or 2012.
Yeah, it was predictable revenues, kind of
Salesforce. There was like that thing. You bought Outreach. You had this machine where if you had it, you had having been in that era of building it, you had this machine where you could do more volume. You could get more out, and that was an advantage.
Yep.
But now, if everyone has that, then there's no advantage, right? And so that's where I think a lot of these people were kind of educated too. So I think we need to like sit down and be like, okay, well, if now everyone's a commodity in the space for software specifically, how do you stand out in a commoditized world?
Yes.
And we'll get into that. And one thing that I think is going to be this big trend is this kind of like, I see sellers, the way sales is going to have to be done is more towards like the closest comparison I can see is almost real estate agent, to be quite honest. And this is an idea I have, and feel free to be like, oh, that's dumb or not. But I see it where like real estate agents are selling commodity, right? And what are real estate agents doing? Well, I talked to a friend and he goes, he's doing a lot of content. And I go, hey dude, why are you doing so much YouTube content and stuff? Right? Like, why are you doing your own content, and don't you get leads from like your company? He goes, well, look, if my brokerage sends me a lead, I split my commission with them 50-50. But if I source my own lead,
that's right,
I get 80-20. And so he goes, I'm incentivized
100%.
to do my own content. So that made me think, holy shit. I think this is where you mentioned self-source AEs, and I think this is a good segue into that. Like, how are they going to have to self-source? And I think part of what they're starting to realize is, holy shit, I got to fend for myself, and I got to start to maybe create my own content, become my own mini marketer in a way.
Well, I think it's the real estate's a great analogy. So let's take that brokerage, for example, that's sending leads. If you want to stand out and be top 1%, top 10%, right, of hopefully of earners and producers, if you are dependent upon the organization who sends out leads, they are sending out leads to everybody, which means that assuming you have a relatively similar close rate as everybody else, even a better one, like 15% versus 20%, you were like everybody else, right? You were just waiting for the meeting. You're waiting for the lead. And so, if an organization has 1,000 leads they distribute equally across their team, well, you're going to have the same amount of at-bats. Well, the only way that you're going to increase your take-home is one of three ways. Either get more at-bats, get better at the at-bats you have, or have substantially larger order sizes, ACVs, LTVs, right? The only way you're going to outproduce anybody else. Otherwise, you're going to be of the average like everybody else, because you are given what everybody else is given. And so the easiest thing to manipulate is certainly you can get better at sales, right? And you can get better at your win rate going from 15 to 20 or 20 to 25, whatever it might be. But there's an interesting phenomenon that happens. We call it the 26% rule, where it's pipeline, win rate, order value. And so oftentimes we think about, okay, well, let's just say hypothetically I'm a $10 million business. I'm going to go to 20 million this year. And let's say we started last year, we got to 10 million this year, right? Just blew up. And then we want to go 20 next year. So we're going to go double again. Well, if we keep our leads, our win rate, and our order value the same, assuming we don't have like MRR or whatever that's recurring, or ARR, we're going to get the same result. And so we're like, okay, well, if you do the exercise saying, okay, great, well, let's just talk about leads. All right, we got 100 leads, that's pipeline. Got 100 leads, that, average order value is, let's say you're 100 leads at a 10% win rate with $1 million order value. There's your 10 million. So pretty easy math. If you ask someone, okay, well, how are you going to go to 20 million? They say, oh, well, it was, like double lead volume. That's natural, right? So they're saying, okay, well, I need to go from 100 leads to 200 leads. Okay, well, that's hard.
Yeah.
But it's doable, right? Say, okay, well, what's another way you could do it? Well, I guess we can go from 10% close rate on 100 leads to 20% close rate on 100 leads at $1 million order value. That'll get us there. That's very hard.
Yeah.
Or keep leads the same, keep the win rate the same, and go from $1 million order value to $2 million order value. That gets us to 20 million as well. All three of those are very difficult. However, the 26% law is if you impact all three of them by just 26%. So if I go from 100 leads to 126, if I go from a 10% close rate to 12.6% close rate, and we can get our order value from $1 million to 1.26 million, 20 million happens. And so it's easier to make to make incremental gains across a couple different categories than it is to make massive gains in any one.
And what do you, of those three, how would you prioritize those? Like if someone gave you that right now, Joey, that's just for number's sake, the same numbers.
Yeah.
Where would you how would you prioritize it?
I'd probably look at win rate first.
Win rate? Okay.
I'd look at win rate first, and I would say, okay, great. 10% is not great, which means I'm losing 90%. Why did I lose the 90%? To your point, maybe I'm not following up enough. Great. Well, it's, if I follow up, the prescribed 5 times that, the statistic says, like, surely there's 2.5% there, 26% gain on my 10%. So I can go to 12.6%. So let's start there, right? I've already got leads in the door. I'm not nurturing them the way I should. I'm not stewarding my leads the way I could, so on. That's an easier gain. the next is your pipeline, right? So, okay, well, I got 100 leads that are handed to me. Could I go self-source an extra 2 a month? That's 24. So call it 2.1, 2.2 leads per month additional on my own time. Well, then I'm going to go from 100 leads to 126, right? And then at that point, it's great. The better you become, the more pipeline you have. This is the ironic part. The more pipeline you have, the better you are at winning, the more risk you can take with your pricing. Right? So it's a simple supply demand economics, right?
Yeah.
If there is more supply in the pipeline and there is more demand because my win rate's gone up, then surely I can manipulate pricing. Now, when I manipulate pricing, let's just say I do go from 1 million to 1.26 average order value, I'm not going to lose my lead volume, but I might drop a little bit in win rate at that point because I've increased pricing and I've maybe disqualified a few people. Okay, well now I work back on win rate, and so it's this constant game of lever pulling, and the goal is just how do I make incremental gains across the entire org to have exponential growth, right? Like if we just continue to do what we're doing, we might just slowly grow, which is good. But I'm a hockey stick kind of growth guy. Like I want to see exponential gains for not that much more lift, and so if I can do that, then that's what I'm going to do. So in order, win rate, pipeline, order value, and then back to win rate, pipeline, order value.
Yeah, the trio. Man, I love the power of 3 stuff when it's just like, it's simple, but not easy, right? Like it's simple. But do a lot of sales leaders think like this today?
No. I think like this because I'm a business owner. Right? I see the all-seeing eye. I look at the P&L. I understand where money goes, where it comes in from. And so I think that I have had that fortune. Unless you've managed a budget or managed the P&L for a business unit or a business, I think it's hard for you to understand holistically how all this works.
Yeah.
And I think oftentimes, here's my other theory in the market. This is not proven by any means, but I do think that there is an aspect of, with the boom that we have seen in the marketplace, there has been a substantial demand on talent. And as organizations have shot out in growth, I also think Silicon Valley is a large contributor to this because they did not care about profit, right? And so because a lot of these tech companies, they trade on revenue, they don't trade on profit margins. So it's a multiple of revenue. Well, if it's a multiple of revenue, then it's just let's go acquire revenue at all costs. We don't have to care about the other metrics. Let's just blunt force grow. And so that just means more technology, more data, more reps, more executive salaries, and so on. The challenge with that is that means there is a higher requirement for talent, right? And to the supply and demand, economics aspect on the talent side is now there are more roles to fill. And so we are letting people who are probably not as qualified take certain roles, entering into sales, right? The whole like break into tech sales now and get a $80,000, $90,000 salary as an SDR, whatever, right? But the same thing happens for sales leadership. I think that some VP of sales have found themselves in a VP of sales because they were a good AE, right? And they don't know how to build the car. They don't know how to drive the car. They were just a passenger in the car and they performed pretty well in that seat. And then they move them over simply because supply and demand, we need a VP of sales. Well, Jimmy's our best performing guy. He must be best to lead the organization. And so you have people who have, I'm not going to say immature or ignorant business acumen. I would just say they don't have the full picture because their experience does not map to it. But at the end of the day, they show up to a VP role, and they just take what they're given, right? And so they're told that meetings matter, so they're going to set their quotas for their sales reps as meetings. They're told that revenue matters more than profitability, so they don't pay attention to cost to acquire customers much. And so I think that unfortunately, we, the industry, have set them up for failure in a lot of ways. And I think that the industry is correcting itself right now, thank goodness. But that's my philosophy. And I don't know if that's the correct one or not, but I think time will tell.
Yeah, I definitely see that. And I see I think the self-sourcing AEs, like I know a couple buddies who pretty much just, Adam Robinson, another LinkedIn guy, I don't know if you know Adam, a good friend of mine. And, he pretty much cut his old SDR team and he saw no difference. Right. And so, but again, he's an e-com Shopify, whole different business model. So it might depend on that stuff too. Right. And so, his AEs, he was like, you're going to prospect now. And I see this, what I'm seeing is companies are like, yeah, we need AEs to prospect more. Right. But then the incentives aren't aligning with what they want them to do. And so you know that Charlie Munger quote, rest in peace, Charlie Munger, but it's like, hey, show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome. Right. Yep. And it's like, and I was part of this kind of machine as well, where, you know, you'd hear managers say, hey, like prospect more, like the CEO saying prospect more. And they're going, I'm getting paid the same. You know, like I'm still getting a salary. Why am I going to, and we have SDRs. What's my incentive to prospect? Right.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering, how do you think this kind of self-sourcing AE trend is gonna work out? Like, where is it gonna fall? I don't think that we should get rid of SDRs because, as you mentioned, I think we have to change.
They have to evolve.
They have to evolve, right? And I think most people, they don't want to do the hard work and helping them evolve, and they're just like, well, let's just cut in and make AEs prospect. But how do you think this is gonna kind of change from this AE perspective?
So a lot of this, actually, this is part of our, you know, our pitch is, I think that there is a massive change or shift in the marketplace. With a massive change or shift in the marketplace, it presents a threat to the majority of organizations. But the good thing is if you can solve for this, then where there are threats, there are opportunities. So that's the positive, which means there will be winners and there will be losers. There'll be far less winners and there'll be far more losers. The threat to the marketplace is outbound profitability. Right. So we're just unable, now that we care more about profit than we ever have, we are unable to get cost to acquire a customer down. And there's so many statistics. This is not just outbound, by the way. This is demand gen. This is everything else, right? Demand gen CAC is atrocious right now. But I think that's the change in the marketplace. The pain is that we can't hit our number, right? The pain is that whether your number is top line or bottom line, companies are just missing both. And so that's the pain they feel because outbound profitability is a problem. The reason outbound profitability is a problem is, I think, a number of things. One is, I think, sales rep cost inflation. SDRs are more expensive than they've ever been. AEs are more expensive than they've ever been. I think that there's sales tech stack bloat. I think far too many companies are throwing licenses at the problem, and all it's doing is digging a deeper hole. You know, we call it the sales acceleration industrial complex, right?
Yeah.
Where we believe that VC money went into all the tech companies, and all the tech companies put all that money into marketing and UI, UX, and promises. Companies buy into it, hook, line, and sinker. They add it to their tech stack, more licenses. Well, there's more reps cost more money, and now there's more licenses to pay for all those reps. And so that's a problem. And then there's obviously decreased deliverability, right? So email opens and responses are dropping. Cold call, 7.7% 3 years ago. It's probably sub 3% on average today, just 3 years later. And so you've got more spend plus less production equals a very, very slippery slope, right? We call that the more is more dilemma, right? And so what we like to say is the famous last words of revenue leaders is more, right? If I just keep spending more, eventually the tipping point will happen and more revenue will come out the bottom.
Yeah.
And so I do think that it comes back to the fundamentals of the scale. Now, to your point on the self-sourcing AEs, if you are going to keep SDRs, if you don't have an alternative to the SDR, you have to go full cycle AE, right? Mm-hmm. My caveat is then don't keep SDRs the way SDRs are currently set up, right? Change the model around the SDR, turn them more into market development, and then make your AEs not be full self-sourcing to cold leads, but have them be self-sourcing to warm, or at least segmented market that's already been talked to. Right, find the hand raisers in the market who aren't willing to necessarily meet, but there's intent, intrigue, interest, or info. We call it the 4 eyes, and follow up with them accordingly. Right, we call them hand raisers or shoulder raisers. They're kind of like, follow up there. Yeah. And so I do think that the true evolution is moving the SDR to more market development, and then moving AEs from just being sit on your ass and wait for meetings and just high ticket closer and get. It's almost like they have to overlap now. It's like market development creates the segments. So SDRs creates the segments. AE's got to dip into those segments and self-source off of that smaller cream of the crop list. And then I think if you combine those two things, then you win. And I think you will win big, not just from a revenue perspective, but a profitability perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. With that being said, I too think with the involvement of the SDR market development, and then also the AE self-sourcing, is like the incentives have to change too, right? Mm-hmm. And this goes back to what you were doing. Like you pay based on like reply completion or something like that, or like
completion. Yeah.
And what do you mean by completion when you do that, right?
So for one, SDRs don't need to be cold emailing, period. With the tech we have today, with like Smart Lead or Instantly or some of these auto rotating inboxes, like there is no need to have an SDR who clicks a button and types some copy. Like, get a copywriter and get an email deliverability person and let them be your email team for all your people, for all your AEs. Right. So let's just take that out. Now, I think that market development is best done on the phone because you can have bi-directional conversations. You can uncover hidden intents. You can uncover valuable information that's not publicly available. You can create intrigue for the market who's not thinking about it, right? That 30% that's not thinking about it, they're not aware. You can make them aware through a conversation. You can ask probing questions, and then you're going to uncover some interest, right? And interest doesn't always mean a meeting. Sometimes it's send me something. Sometimes it's, hey, follow up me in 2 weeks. This is interesting. I think that's where that has to move towards. And so the model that we have built is we give a base, right? Just like anything, I want to make sure their bills are covered, at least nominally. And so our model is 48,000 flat base forever, unless you move up, right? Now what changes is, and for the record, our SDRs, talking about cost inflation, our SDRs OTE is about 144,000 a year, more than anywhere else in the market. Now we also have we have a little bit of proprietary technology that kind of helps with that with formatted leads, but the way that we comp is off of a completion. So most people comp off of meetings, right? Their quotas are around meetings. Ours is around completion. So a completion is defined as I got the person I intended at the account that I wanted to break into all the way through the cold pitch, and I segmented them to where they're currently at in the market, right? I pay between 5 and 10, depending on how early you are with us. It's between $5 and $10 per completion, and those outcomes for completions are not me, not now, yes, meeting, or activation, right? One of those 4 I's I mentioned.
Yeah.
And so I don't care if it's a meeting or it's a not now or it's a not me. I'm going to pay $10 because that's data. That's the market development side of things. That's the data. I'm paying for the data to segment the market. And so SDRs love that, right? So to the point of like 3.5 months to ramp, 14 months to quota, 18 months to churn a rep, we're not going to have that problem. They ramp in month 1. They're hitting quota in month 1. And they don't churn because they're making a lot more money, and there's not pressure on unnecessary metrics like meeting quotas, right? Their metrics are around completions.
Yeah.
And so we're going to solve for keeping high quality reps who are very good on the phone around for a long time, who are making the money that they want to make that they can't make anywhere else. And I think that changes the SDR model. And indirectly, because you're segmenting the model and you're forcing AEs to do professional follow-up on the segments, that changes the AE model. So that's how we comp things. It works.
If you look at that at scale, I love that, but how everyone says that term. But in an organization, like a fully fledged organization, the problem, there's so many problems that occur when you have the incentive of the meeting, right? Like get the meeting. Because then what happens is you probably know, is like the SDR gets someone who wants to take a meeting. The AE goes, dude, this is not qualified. This is trash. Not this. This is trash. This is this. This is this. This is this. And so I like that, because what happens then is it's like, no, we're just trying to fit them in the right hole, or like in the right pocket of where they should be, right?
That's right.
And it's almost like a more truthful like representation of where someone's at, versus saying, hey, because I get paid on a meeting, I'm going to make you take this and I'm going to hold it down your throat. And then you're saying no. And then your manager gets involved and they're like, why are you not taking the meeting, man? Like, what's going on? And it just creates, I think it's a culture killer too, man.
It's a huge, it's the 18-month churn. It is a culture killer. And I think that, I personally think that when we force meetings, 1, it's a culture killer. 2, like the statistic is the statistic. Like we look at the Bridge Group study, which a lot of us would say is a widely accepted sales development rep study. 55% show rate across the board. So even if you set 10, 5.5 are only showing up. Okay. Well, if the 5.5 show up and your AE complains about 30% of those, well, then realistically, you paid all this money or you set quotas or whatever around meetings to really get like 3 people instead of the 10 you set. It's not a really good business use case. So I think you're right. 1, they force bad meetings. 2, the meetings don't even show up, even if they're good ones necessarily. And you and I both know the AE's sitting on their ass and they're not going to follow up with the 45% that don't show up, right? They're complaining, oh, dude, this guy didn't even show up. It's like, well, did you, like we talked to them There was a level of intent there because we talked to him and he's willing to take the meeting. Did you follow up? No, it's not my job. Well, okay, well, get fucked.
Yeah.
Respectfully.
Yeah, respectfully.
Sorry.
Dude, well, this has been a great conversation, Joey. This has been awesome, man. Well, Joey, it's been real, man. I'll let you know when this stuff all comes out. I'll send you a couple clips. We do a bunch of cool shit that you can use.
Cool.